Earlier on, when we started the bulletin, I told you about a member of parliament who's willing to pay women in his constituency once they give birth. Why? I will be explaining it just now, but I've already seen quite a bit of your feedback. Perhaps you don't understand what it is. That's what my explainer tonight is about. But first, I'd like you to listen to the MP himself. This is MURIUKI NJAGAGUA. He's the Member of Parliament for MBEERE North Constituency. And this is his promise to you if you have a child between now and the month of March. Listen.
Nimeona magazeti inaandika, nao ni marafiki zangu, hawana shida hawa, kwamba MBEERE North ni moja ya zile constituency wananusanusia ambapo zinaweza potea. Bize kana mwarone kidhori, kanangi nyenzi, atimarauga gicigo kia MBEERE North kireni mwanthurire ngamurungamirire. Ange kuromote na population ya ndure kuendeka ati constituency ya MBEERE North ikaura anga mutire gwite kamutire ne umuthie kendo kya mbere na niko muthikagu yagora nenge ya mutuba ne mwere muthie muciarane ni muciarana na kaba kana gaciarwa ngeruta ngiri kana igiri nigenda mwengeve muthikagu ndukegwe nonga yaugire tuciarana na tutambe teguo wakikuja kuhesabiana, you make sure that you are enumerated mauka gutara na gutara ndware aciare na mwitire mbindu na gweta nigenda gicigo kia MBEERE North gitige kiata no ni ngakorwa nginyite nthi gutakaragita kuga constituency ya MBEERE North izipote ejeria no ambeka waro mami.
And he takes a drink after making that promise. So that is what it is all about. MBEERE North is not the only constituency that is at risk of being scrapped. There's another 27. And this is all to do with the boundaries review process that is coming up. Now, it may sound like a bit of a joke when you're giving mothers 1,000, 2,000, and I will explain what that is about, even to do with the census in just a moment. But this is a very important issue. In fact, this is why that member of parliament you've just seen went on to further defend this issue, talking about how this is something that he is prepared to fight tooth and nail for. You cannot just kill minority constituencies. So what is all of this about? Before we even get into that discussion with Senator Johnson Sakaja, who's with us tonight, let's understand next how you define a constituency. What goes into drawing that boundary? What are some of the considerations that decides all of these 290 constituencies that we have? Well, how do you define a constituency is the big question tonight. How do you do this? Well, it's a bit of an intricate and complicated process. We will try and break it down for you. Next, we will have to take a look at the Constitution, because that is where this process is enshrined. It is in Article 89 on delimitation of electoral units. So I will just read for you part 1 and 2, which states there shall be 290 constituencies for the purposes of the election of members of National Assembly. It goes on to say that the IEBC, that is the body that actually does boundaries review, shall review the names and boundaries at intervals of not less than 8 years and not more than 12 years. Now, a number of factors go into taking a look at what's a constituency. How do we lump people together in a constituency that becomes MBEERE North, that becomes Mvita, Lamu East? So they take a look at geographical features, historical features. There's also economic, cultural, and historical ties that they take a look at, identity and uniqueness of the people that are in that border, and inclusion as well. How did they arrive at this when the Boundaries Commission took a look at this in 2010? Well, they defined it by numbers. So if you take a look at this next one here, the threshold that we have put here is 133,000 people per constituency. So once you have 133 people in this area, it then becomes a constituency. Now, there have been some variations to allow for some of these. So it could be plus or minus 30% of this figure for rural areas and a little bit more for the cities and the sparsely populated areas. How did they arrive at this number? That's what is important, that's coming up next year. And that is by dividing the total population by the number of constituencies. So in 2010, after that census, the population then was 38 million, divide by 290, that's how we arrived at this figure. Which is why the census that is coming up next year is extremely important, because obviously the numbers are not the same from 10 years ago when we did that. So it's going to be triggered by that census that is taking place in March next year, which is why the MBEERE MP is saying when you come to be counted next year, be in your locality, and he wants the numbers to be shored up. Although I might add that his math may be a little bit off, because if he's just starting right now to pay mothers to give birth by March, he's off by a couple of months, right? Gestation period for humans is 9 months. He might have wanted to start this a little earlier in the year to make sure he has enough for March next year, right? Okay, so I want to talk about these 27 constituencies, that were spared from being scrapped during the last boundaries review. These are just 3 of them: Othaya, Isiolo South, Lamu East, there's Lamu West, there's a number of them. Now these were spared because at the time it was to grant them protection. They were marginalized, they were ethnic minorities in those regions. Let me give you one example. So Mbita and Kuria, you know, Kuria are a minority, and they might have felt being boxed in with the majority of the Luos would have meant they lose their voice and lose their right to representation. The same also in MBEERE North, smaller community wanting them to not lose their voice and to maintain their integrity and their voice in that respect. Why is this important? There are a number of legal issues. That law that allowed these constituencies not to be scrapped then does not exist today. That is one. Now, they would have to take a look at whether the circumstances then are still the same today and would grant them protection. Here's another question. 290 is the maximum, and it is stated in the Constitution, which means it cannot be changed unless by referendum. So if we're talking about taking a look at boundaries review, does that mean we'll have less? Or would we have more? What would the boundaries review mean? But the biggest one here is the political questions that surround this. So this is something, a phenomenon that is known. You hear of the term gerrymandering, and I'll ask Johnson Sakaja about this in just a little while. But there's also something known as packing and cracking of areas. So what some people can do, which is some, malfeasance, is to put all your party supporters in one constituency and then you're guaranteed a win. Or you spread all of them by, throwing around the boundaries and, fuzzing it around so that you make sure the supporters of your opponent are in different constituencies and therefore you get to win. So these are some of the political shenanigans that can take place during a boundaries review, which is why it is a touchy subject. It is also a touchy subject because you could end up separating families. You separate people. You put people together with others that they probably do not agree with. So there's a number of issues. Also at stake, money for development. You see, in this country, money for development, the CDF, is administered at the constituency level, right? Also, money for the counties is administered where? At the ward level. The wards are important building blocks of constituencies. So there's money at stake and there's politics at stake. So these are a number of very key issues that go into why this is touchy, and remember, it is being preceded by a census.